Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed everything? A black caregiver sang softly to an elderly woman, unaware that her millionaire son was watching, and it would change her life forever, but not in the romantic way you might think. "I'm sorry, but we have to make some adjustments to your work situation." Supervisor Rebecca's cold voice cut through the morning air of the luxurious Peton residence like a sharp blade. The family has expressed concerns about, let's say, cultural compatibility. Kesha Williams, 28, stood motionless beside the bed of Mrs. Catherine Peton, her patient of 6 months. Her hands still held delicately those of the elderly woman, who had fallen asleep minutes earlier to the sound of a softly sung lullaby. "Cultural compatibility," Kesha repeated, her voice maintaining a calm that surprised even Rebecca. "And what exactly does that mean?" Rebecca adjusted her glasses nervously. "Well, they feel that someone with a more suitable profile would be better for Mrs. Petman's care, someone who better understands family traditions." What Rebecca didn't know was that Kesha had overheard the entire phone conversation the previous morning. Jonathan Peton, heir to the family's pharmaceutical empire, had called in a rage after seeing that girl on the security cameras, demanding that they find someone more suitable to care for his mother. "I understand perfectly," Kesha replied, gently letting go of Mrs. Catherine's hand. "When do I need to leave?" "Well, today would be ideal. We already have a replacement arriving this afternoon." Kesha nodded, beginning to gather her few personal belongings. But something in her eyes revealed a disturbing serenity, as if she already knew exactly how this story would end. As she walked down the marble hallway toward the exit, Kesha passed the main library's bookshelf, her fingers discreetly brushed against a specific biography. Jonathan Peton, the young visionary of the pharmaceutical business. She had read that book 3 times in the last 6 months. Every page, every interview, every public statement, especially the part where he talked about maintaining the highest ethical standards in his company. What the Peton family had no idea was that this simple caregiver had spent the last few months collecting much more than fond memories of Mrs. Catherine. Can you imagine the power of being underestimated? If this story of prejudice disguised as standards has sparked your outrage, don't forget to subscribe to the Black Voices channel, because what happened next proved that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake of your life. 3 hours after being fired, Kesha received a message that made her blood boil. Jonathan Peton had posted a photo of himself visiting his mother on LinkedIn, accompanied by a hypocritical caption about family values and excellent care. "I've had to make some difficult changes to my beloved mother's care team," he wrote. "Sometimes maintaining high standards requires courageous decisions. Family comes first." The comments were a mix of praise from other business people and hearts from admirers. None of them had any idea that those high standards meant firing someone because of the color of their skin. What hurt the most wasn't even the dismissal itself. It was knowing that Mrs. Catherine had whispered to her the day before, "Kesha, you remind me of the daughter I never had. Promise you'll never leave me." Kesha had promised, and now she was broken twice. The promise and her heart. Sitting in her small apartment, she opened her laptop and reviewed the files she had meticulously organized over the past 6 months. Not out of paranoia, but out of experience. At 28, Kesha Williams wasn't just a skilled caregiver. She had a nursing degree from the University of Pittsburgh with a specialization in geriatrics and had worked in elite hospitals before choosing home care. Why would a nurse with such an impeccable resume choose to care for patients in their homes for less pay? The answer lay in the dozens of wealthy families who had tried to get rid of her over the years, always with the same veiled excuses about cultural fit or a better match. Kesha had learned to document everything. Every suspicious conversation was discreetly recorded. Every prejudiced comment was noted with the date and time. Every lie told to the family about her performance carefully countered with concrete evidence. In the Petons' case, she had discovered much more than she had expected. Over the past few months, while singing to Mrs. Catherine and organizing her medications, Kesha had noticed disturbing inconsistencies. Unnecessary prescriptions being automatically renewed, expensive medications being wasted in quantities that could feed an entire family, and even stranger, frequent visits from pharmaceutical representatives who talked at length with Jonathan about new treatment options for his mother. Mrs. Catherine didn't need half of those medications. Kesha knew this because she had discreetly reviewed each prescription with her medical background. Some were even counterproductive for someone in her condition. But what really sealed Jonathan's fate was the conversation she had accidentally recorded when he thought he was alone in his home office. A phone call where he laughed, describing how he was maximizing the old lady's health insurance benefits and how those caregivers don't even realize the whole scheme. Kesha smiled bitterly as she organized the evidence. Jonathan Petton, the young visionary of the pharmaceutical business, was using his own mother as a guinea pig for a health insurance fraud scheme, inflating costs with unnecessary medications and splitting the profits with a network of doctors and pharmacies. The model's son was literally poisoning his mother with unnecessary medications to make money. Meanwhile, he had fired the only person who truly cared about Mrs. Catherine's well-being, all because he couldn't stand seeing a black woman taking care of his family with more competence and compassion than he had ever shown. Kesha closed her laptop and walked over to the mirror. For months, she had played the role of the simple, submissive caregiver, allowing Jonathan and his team to completely underestimate her. They saw only a black woman who needed the job and should be grateful for the opportunity. What they didn't know was that they were dealing with someone who had collected enough evidence to destroy not only Jonathan's reputation but his entire company. Every whispered insult, every condescending look, every comment about her suitability had only fueled her determination. For months, they thought they were dealing with a helpless victim. In fact, they were feeding a hurricane that was about to devastate everything around them. What that privileged heir couldn't see was that every act of contempt was signing his own death warrant. And when the storm hit, there would be no shelter safe enough to protect him from the consequences of underestimating someone who should never have been underestimated. The next morning, Jonathan Petton woke up feeling victorious. His LinkedIn post had received over 200 complimentary comments from other executives congratulating him on his strong leadership and tough decisions. He had turned the act of firing a black woman into a lesson in business management. Sometimes you have to be tough to maintain excellence, he commented in an impromptu interview for the Visionary Leaders podcast 3 days after Kesha's dismissal. We can't let sentimentality get in the way of providing the best care for those we love. The host, clearly impressed, asked about the rigorous criteria Jonathan applied in selecting caregivers. Well, Jonathan laughed, adjusting his expensive tie. You have to have certain standards. It's not just anyone who understands the needs of a family like ours. The interview was shared on the company's social media with a hashtag business leadership. Jonathan felt invincible. Meanwhile, Kesha sat in a discreet cafe in the city center across the table from a woman Jonathan would never have expected to see there. Dr. Patricia Santos, a white-collar crime attorney and one of the most feared federal prosecutors in the country. So, you have recordings of him admitting to insurance fraud? Patricia asked, meticulously reviewing the documents Kesha had organized. Not just admitting, Kesha replied, connecting her cell phone to a small speaker. He laughs. He literally laughs as he describes how he's maximizing the benefits of his own mother's condition. Jonathan's voice echoed through the cafe. That old woman doesn't even realize how much medication she's taking. Insurance pays for everything, and there's a nice commission left over to split with the doctors in the network. It's a perfect scheme. She gets premium care and I get the benefits. Patricia stopped drinking her coffee. My God, he's literally poisoning his own mother for money. Exactly. And when I subtly questioned some unnecessary medications, he increased the doses. He said I didn't have the proper training to question medical treatments. Kesha smiled bitterly. He didn't know I'm a nurse with a specialty in geriatrics. How did you two meet? Asked Patricia, clearly intrigued by Kesha's meticulous preparation. Kesha took a deep breath. My older sister, Jennifer Santos, worked as an investigator in your office 3 years ago. She died in a car accident last year, but she always talked about how you took down criminals who thought they were above the law. Patricia paled. Jennifer Santos, she was your sister. She was one of the best investigators I ever worked with. She had an impressive instinct for detecting fraud. She taught me a lot about documenting evidence. She said I might need that skill someday. Kesha opened a neatly organized binder with colored dividers. That's why I spent 6 months gathering evidence before I was fired. I knew that family would eventually show its true colors. Patricia leafed through the documents, copies of medical prescriptions, medication cost spreadsheets, records of unnecessary doctor visits, recordings of conversations between Jonathan and pharmaceutical representatives, even discreet photos of suspicious meetings in a home office. "This is a masterpiece of investigation," Patricia murmured. "You have enough evidence to bury not just Jonathan, but the entire network of doctors and pharmacies involved." "There's more," said Kesha, opening her laptop. "I found out he's not just a spoiled heir. Jonathan is using his mother's fraud scheme as a pilot model to expand the business. He plans to apply it to other wealthy patients through a new premium care company he's launching." On the screen appeared internal emails from Jonathan's company, detailed business plans to maximize opportunities in geriatric care, and proposals to investors describing how to optimize returns through prolonged treatments. Patricia was speechless. "How did you get access to this?" 6 months of taking care of his house. He saw me as furniture, a black woman who didn't understand these things. He left his computer open, talked on the phone in front of me, discussed business as if I were invisible. Kesha smiled coldly. Invisibility can be a powerful weapon when used correctly, and he never suspected. Jonathan sees what he wants to see. To him, I was just an uneducated caregiver who should feel privileged to work in his house. He never imagined that a woman like me could understand medical terms, insurance laws, or business documents. Patricia began to smile. "You know, this will completely destroy his life, don't you? We're not just talking about civil lawsuits. This is a federal crime. He could get decades in prison." "I know," Kesha replied calmly. "But first, I want him to feel exactly what I felt when I was fired for not being the right fit. I want him to realize that he completely underestimated the wrong person." "And how do you plan to do that?" Kesha opened one last folder. Inside were printed copies of all of Jonathan's recent comments and interviews, including excerpts from a podcast interview where he had practically confessed to racial discrimination on national radio. "First, we're going to use his own words to show the world who he really is." Then she pointed to the criminal evidence. "We're going to show what he did to his own mother." Patricia held out her hand. "Jennifer would be proud of you. When do we start?" "We've already started," Kesha replied, shaking the lawyer's hand. "Jonathan thinks he's celebrating a victory. In reality, he just signed his own professional death warrant." As they left the cafe, neither woman noticed that Jonathan's victory was being celebrated prematurely. The arrogant heir had underestimated not only a skilled nurse, but an entire network of people who supported her. For a moment, Jonathan had thought that getting rid of Kesha would solve all his problems. What he didn't know was that he had just awakened a hurricane that had been studying her every move for months and now had the legal firepower to turn his arrogance into his most devastating downfall. Jonathan Peton woke up the following Monday feeling on top of the world. His podcast interview had gone viral, earning him invitations to speak at universities and offers of business partnerships. He had turned the firing of a mere caregiver into a masterclass on executive leadership until his phone rang at 7:45 a.m. "Mr. Peton, this is Agent Diana Walsh of the FBI. I need to talk to you about some irregularities in your pharmaceutical business. Can we talk this morning?" Jonathan almost spilled his coffee. "FBI, what are you talking about? There must be some mistake." "There is no mistake, sir. We are investigating systematic fraud in the health insurance system. Your name has come up several times in our records." As Jonathan stammered, trying to understand what was happening, his assistant, Caroline, rushed into his office, her face pale as a sheet. "Mr. Petman, there's something you need to see. It's urgent." She turned on the television to the local news channel. The anchor was talking about an explosive investigation involving fraud in the healthcare system that could reach millions of dollars. "Exclusive documents obtained by our station reveal an elaborate scheme in which a pharmaceutical company heir is allegedly using his own elderly mother as a guinea pig to inflate drug costs." Jonathan's photo appeared on the screen. "Oh my God," he whispered, feeling his legs go weak. "How did they get?" Caroline pointed to the computer. Sir, the company website. Look at this. The Peton Pharmaceuticals homepage had been hacked. In place of the elegant logo was a banner that read "Company run by a criminal. Patients at risk." Below, a video began to play automatically. It was Kesha sitting in a professional studio dressed formally and with a poise Jonathan had never seen before. Confident, articulate, powerful. "My name is Kesha Williams. I am a geriatric nurse, and for 6 months I cared for Mrs. Catherine Petman, the mother of CEO Jonathan Peton. What I discovered during that time could save the lives of hundreds of vulnerable elderly people." Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face as Kesha continued with a surgical calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment for months. "During my work, I systematically documented how Mr. Peton used his own mother as part of a criminal health insurance fraud scheme. Unnecessary medications, fake appointments, prolonged treatments, all to maximize profits at the expense of a defenseless elderly woman's health." The screen split, showing Kesha speaking on one side and documents, prescriptions, cost spreadsheets, and audio recordings on the other. Jonathan's voice echoed clearly. "That old woman doesn't even realize how many medications she's taking. Insurance covers everything, and there's a nice commission on top of that." "My God," Caroline whispered. "That's your voice, Mr. Petman." Jonathan was paralyzed, watching his own destruction being broadcast live across the country. But the worst was yet to come. "When I questioned some questionable medical procedures," Kesha continued in the video, "Mr. Peton not only ignored my professional concerns, he increased the dangerous dosages. And when that wasn't enough to silence me, he decided to fire me." The screen now showed a recording of Jonathan's conversation with his supervisor, Rebecca, where he demanded to find someone more appropriate to care for his mother. "The reason for my dismissal? According to Mr. Peton, I wasn't a cultural fit for the family. Translation: I was too black to take care of his mother." Jonathan's phone exploded with calls, investors, board members, lawyers, journalists, all wanting explanations he couldn't give. But Kesha wasn't finished yet. "What Mr. Peton didn't know is that I have a nursing degree from the University of Pittsburgh with a specialization in geriatrics. I worked in elite hospitals before choosing home care. He saw me as a mere caregiver because he couldn't see beyond the color of my skin." On the screen appeared diplomas, certifications, letters of recommendation from renowned doctors, academic awards, a resume that made Jonathan's look mediocre. "For 6 months, while you treated me like I was invisible, I documented every crime, every lie, every act of cruelty against your own mother. Because unlike you, I understand what it means to care for someone who has trusted me." The video ended with a devastating image. Jonathan being arrested live on camera, handcuffed in front of the company that had borne his family's name for 3 generations. The phone rang again. It was the company lawyer, Dr. Patterson, his voice trembling. "Jonathan, I need you to come to the office immediately. Search warrants have just arrived. The FBI is confiscating all computers and documents. And there's more." "More what?" Jonathan managed to ask his voice. "The federal prosecutor wants a deal. They have enough evidence to seek life imprisonment for systematic fraud, elder abuse, and money laundering." Kesha Williams handed over years of evidence. "Jonathan. She had everything. Absolutely everything." As Jonathan staggered toward his car, Caroline shouted from the window, "Sir, the media is here." Outside, a crowd of reporters and cameras waited. Microphones were thrust toward him as questions flew from all sides. "Is it true that you poisoned your own mother for money? How does it feel to be exposed by a woman you fired for racism? Will you apologize to Nurse Kesha Williams?" Jonathan tried to run to his car but tripped over his own feet, falling to his knees on the asphalt. The cameras captured every second of his humiliation. At that very moment, 15 miles away, Kesha was being interviewed live by 3 stations simultaneously. She wore an impeccable navy blazer, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, and she spoke with the authority of someone who had studied every move of this game for months. "I didn't do this out of revenge," she said calmly, looking directly into the camera. "I did it for Mrs. Catherine, who deserved real care, not to be used as a source of income." I did it for all the vulnerable elderly people who are victims of schemes like this. And I did it because I believe that competence and character matter more than prejudices disguised as family values." The presenter asked, "How do you feel knowing that your evidence could result in decades in prison for Jonathan Patton?" Kesha paused, choosing her words carefully. "I feel like a nurse who has finally managed to protect her patient. Mr. Patton thought he could throw me away like trash because of the color of my skin. He found out he completely underestimated the wrong person." As Jonathan was led away in handcuffs, passing a crowd of journalists shouting questions, a single question echoed in her mind. How had a simple black caregiver managed to destroy his empire in a matter of hours? But perhaps the most important question was another. If you had all the power and privilege in the world, but no character or compassion, how long would it take for someone like Kesha Williams to prove that true strength doesn't come from a silver spoon, but from the courage to do what's right, regardless of the cost? 6 months after Jonathan Patton's spectacular collapse, Kesha Williams sat in her new office on the 22nd floor of a downtown building, watching the movement through the panoramic window. The sign on the door read, "Kesha Williams, RN Director of Quality and Compliance, Mercy Health Systems." Her investigation had become a national landmark. The Patton versus Williams case was studied in law schools as a perfect example of how documenting evidence can bring down complex criminal schemes. 3 universities had already offered her full scholarships to complete her master's degree in hospital administration. The phone rang. It was Dr. Patricia Santos, now her personal attorney and close friend. "Kesha, I have news about Jonathan," Patricia said, her tone a mixture of satisfaction and justice. The sentence came down today. 22 years in federal prison plus $15 million in fines and restitution. Patton Pharmaceuticals was sold to pay off the debts. He lost absolutely everything. Kesha closed her eyes for a moment. And Mrs. Catherine, she's fine. Without those unnecessary medications, she has regained mobility and lucidity that doctors thought were lost forever. She's living in a first-rate nursing home, paid for with the money recovered from the scheme, and she's been asking about you. "I'm going to visit her tomorrow," Kesha replied, smiling for the first time in months. Later, Kesha drove to the federal prison where Jonathan was serving his sentence. Not to gloat, but to close a chapter. He appeared on the other side of the bulletproof glass, wearing the standard orange uniform with deep dark circles under his eyes and gray hair that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. "Why?" was the first thing he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why did you do this? I could have helped you. I could have given you a promotion, a better salary." Kesha studied him for a long moment. "Jonathan, you really don't understand, do you? This was never about money or position. It was about dignity. It was about recognizing that competence and character have no color." He lowered his head. I never meant to hurt my mother. It was just money, but you were hurting her. And when I tried to protect her, you fired me because you couldn't accept that a black woman could be more qualified than you to take care of your own family." Jonathan remained silent, finally understanding the magnitude of his arrogance. "You know what's ironic?" Kesha continued, "If you had treated me with respect from the beginning, I would have been your biggest ally. I would have helped you take better care of your mother and I never would have found out about your scheme. Your prejudice was literally the cause of your own downfall." As she got up to leave, Jonathan muttered, "Can you ever forgive me?" Kesha paused at the door. "Jonathan, I forgave you months ago because holding on to anger would give you power over my life that you don't deserve. I'd rather use my energy to build something better." 3 weeks later, Kesha stood on the main stage of the National Nursing Conference, receiving the Advocate of the Year award for her courage in exposing elder neglect and abuse. The audience of more than 3,000 healthcare professionals rose to a 5-minute standing ovation. "When I started out as a caregiver," she said into the microphone, "many people saw me as just a black woman who should be grateful for the opportunity. They couldn't see my education, my experience, or my genuine passion for caring for vulnerable people." The audience was completely silent. What Jonathan Patton didn't understand is that competence has no color. That character has no social class. And that the person you fire today because of prejudice may be the very person who destroys your life tomorrow, not out of revenge, but out of justice. The applause was deafening. 6 months later, Kesha opened her own consulting firm specializing in compliance and quality for healthcare institutions. In her first year, she earned more than Jonathan had earned in his entire career at the family business. Her story became an Emmy-nominated Netflix documentary. Mrs. Catherine, now 82 and surprisingly lucid, was her first VIP client. Not because she needed special care, but because she wanted to invest her own savings in Kesha's business. "You saved my life in 2 ways," the elderly woman said during a visit to Kesha's new office. "First, by protecting me from my own son. Then by showing me that there are still people who do the right thing regardless of the cost." Kesha smiled, watching the city bustle by the window. A year ago, she was seen as a mere caregiver who should know her place. Today, she was nationally recognized as one of the leading experts on ethics in healthcare. The best revenge hadn't been destroying Jonathan Peton, although that had been a natural consequence of her actions. The best revenge had been proving that true strength doesn't come from inherited privilege or prejudice disguised as standards, but from the courage to do what's right, from competence built through hard work, and from the dignity that no one can take away from you. Jonathan tried to humiliate Kesha because of the color of her skin. But he ended up discovering that he had completely underestimated the wrong person. She learned that the best response to prejudice is not anger. It is success so spectacular that it forces even your enemies to recognize your greatness. If this story of courage and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the Black Voices channel for more stories that prove that sometimes being underestimated is the biggest advantage you can have. Because when we finally show our true strength, the whole world stops to watch.